Thank you for joining me for another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I am joined by Stuart Lynch. Hey, Stuart, thank you so much for coming on
Hey,
the show today.
hey, thanks for having me on.
We have a lot to talk about, but before we begin, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, my name is Stuart Lynch, and you can tell by my looks, I've been around for a while. Yeah, actually, didn't, if you're interested in how I got into iOS development, I didn't really get into it until after my second retirement. So I spent a lot of years working up to the dive into iOS development. I spent 11 years as a school teacher. Um, 2 years as a district helping teacher, trying to get other teachers to integrate technology. That was back in the 80s. Spent 3 years in hell as a high school vice principal. And then another 16 years as a director of technology for two different school districts before I took an early retirement, and then joined a software company, Canada's largest software company. And that's where I played a number of roles there, including doing some after party or value added software development based on the platform that this software company, their platform, and taught people how to code on that platform. So, my background is really in teaching other people how to use technology and how to develop. So, started after I got let go of that job, when they downsized, I started learning iOS development. And that was just when Swift was released in 2014.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's where I started. And 2 years ago, I guess it was, I started a YouTube channel just to share my thoughts on software development in the iOS environment.
Yeah, if folks haven't checked your YouTube channel out, definitely do. The link will be in the show notes. But what's it like being a YouTuber? What was the biggest challenge getting started there?
Well, I had done YouTube videos for this company, so it wasn't new to me, because I'm always dealing with topics that I know a fair amount of in those days. I mean, I was just basically going through this product, and so I did all their product videos. And it took me quite a while to get the confidence to be able to share what I thought I knew in iOS development. And I think that that's probably what has increased my ability to be able to develop in a logical fashion, was being forced to put my thoughts down. I mean, a lot of people do it in blogs. I do it in videos. And so,
Gotcha.
that was just, it was a goal of mine to try and share. I've always shared. So that was just something that I decided to do.
So, one of your latest set of videos has been building this top headlines app. Do you want to explain how that's been going?
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit. When I first started doing YouTube videos, the whole theme was to do things to teach people not to have the bad habits that I had when I first started out. And so most of my in single videos are sort of on fundamentals that try to dig down, to follow the documentation a bit, to understand why some things work the way that they do, and not just copy and paste code, but really to understand why you have to do something, or why you do something one way. So I built up probably close to 100 videos just on single standalone topics on iOS development. And they're
Wow.
pretty much, they're Swift based, but any of the UI stuff is Swift UI. I made that decision not too long ago to basically focus just on Swift UI. And so, eventually you start to run out of those fundamental topics. So I started to I put together a few playlists on some things. And then I decided, okay, well, let me try and focus on what might be someone's portfolio app that will focus on a particular topic. So go through something that takes it through, but doesn't take any shortcuts. Like oftentimes you'll see people that they'll do videos on YouTube, and then they'll have print statements in the place of where there might be an error, and they all say, "Now you shouldn't do this in real code." And so, I thought, yeah, well, that doesn't help. That doesn't help people that are starting out. So what I'm
Right.
trying to do in my short 3-4 video series are basically take people through concepts that they might be proud of as a portfolio app, but also demonstrate that this could be a piece of a real app because I'm covering error handling in many cases, and I'm doing things as to what you might want to do so that your app is going to be presentable, so that you could take those concepts and throw them together into your, your pet project, your bigger app. So so my headlines, or the headlines one too, was one that, okay, we're on the cusp now of going from iOS 14 to iOS 15. Um, how do I, if I have an app right now, how can I make sure that I can start to take advantage of some of the iOS 15 features, yet still maintain my user base that have not yet updated? So the whole
Okay.
theme behind that one is to sort of conditionally apply iOS 15 techniques, yet still have a target that is iOS 14.
Okay.
And so that was
Yeah,
the
that
theme
makes
of that
sense.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now that you talked about getting good habits, I figured let's get into the meat of our discussion today. We're talking about how to how to learn new stuff, because over the last year, I have been trying to like deep dive into a lot of new APIs and kind of learning new things. I think a lot of us have obviously been jumping into Swift UI. That's been a big one. And of course, I recently turned 40, and I want to stay fresh.
I
And this
recently
is
turned
episode.
70, so
Shh, you're not supposed to
okay,
say
so I'm
that.
still trying to stay fresh.
Mr. Second Retirement over here.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and this is episode 101. This is the third anniversary of the show. So I think like if there's anything us developers have to run into is learning new stuff. And one of the big challenges that I've faced has been, I don't want to say like breaking bad habits so much as like wrapping my head around a new way of doing things. And that's especially the case with Swift UI. Um, we like actually I do remember doing MVVM whenever I've done anything in JavaScript, or when I was doing do you remember Silverlight? Do you remember Silverlight? Okay.
Yeah, actually I do. Yeah.
You do? Okay. So I used to do Silverlight when I was back 100 years ago, when I was a .NET developer, and that was very much like two-way data binding and MVVM. And then I became an iOS developer, right? And it was like, no, MVC is the way to do things, and UIKit and all that. And there's like the crazy people who do reactive, right? And now we're
Right.
all going over to doing Swift UI, and now I have to like rewrap my brain around the way I have to do stuff, using combine and data binding and things like that. So like I think that's a big challenge for a lot of folks, especially those of us who have like habits and ways that we do things, is trying to do things a new way and adapting to that. You'll hear like old Objective C developers, right? Who'll just like, oh, I
Hmm.
hate Swift. It's so strict. It's so tough. And like, what are some ways those like folks like us can like learn these new things and wrap our like reconfigure the way we code essentially?
Yeah. Uh, it's a good question, because I don't think that my audience is necessarily people who are um, experienced developers. More my audience is more people who are starting out and developing bad habits. So you don't have bad habits; you just have different habits. So it's a little different. And so yeah, I guess I get intimidated by people like yourself because I don't feel like I have an awful lot to offer someone like yourself. Although sometimes I do get feedback from experienced developers saying, "Yeah, that was great. I didn't realize that." And you tend to forget that when you yourself are deep into a particular architecture, that's really all you know. And in fact, you don't even know all of it. You know a small piece of it, and
Right.
you have done things one way for so long that you don't necessarily know that there might be another way, and I
Right.
love reading these, this I learned type things from people on that tweet, because I'm a big Twitter follower. And I'm saying, you didn't know that? I mean, I knew that right from the beginning. And you tend to forget that people develop these habits that are really difficult to break out of and
Yes.
to do other things, right? So I think that the biggest thing is to have an open mind, and experience other people's content just to see what it is. Now, I may not be the best example because I take things pretty slow. So I recommend people watch my videos at 1.3 speed or faster, and then just slow down when they need to, because I try not to leave out any gaps. So, if you're just starting out, you can code along with me because, I'm going through things and I'm explaining them and highlighting them on the screen. But someone like yourself could get through my stuff really quickly, and you never know, what you can just pick up from somebody. So, I have myself, I've kind of graduated from watching a lot of YouTube videos from other content providers and now more myself reading blog posts because I'm at that level that I can understand that kind of stuff a little bit better, whereas I'm a more visual learner. Yet, just the other day there, I'm watching something from Sean Allen on, because I'm sitting around and I'm got nothing better to do. I'll start to watch some YouTube videos and I'll speed his up and watch them as well. And you just pick up these little tips and things that are just thinking like that's brilliant. I hadn't really thought
Yeah,
about that.
that's
That's
what
a
I find
different
super
way of doing
helpful.
things.
Yeah, if there's
And
anything from watching someone else, it's not necessarily when it's content that I already know. It's finding out like all these new habits and tricks that you didn't know about. Like you're saying, like when you were watching Sean, right?
right, yeah, and and then I'll try to incorporate that and share those. Obviously, I'm really conscious about stealing somebody else's ideas and trying to claim them as my own. Like I'm super conscientious about that. So all of my videos, if any of the stuff that I'm presenting originated from somebody else, I'm going to give them credit for that because I think that's really important. It's just that I might have a different take on it and a different presentation. And so there's no one way to learn. I mean, like for example, when I decided that I was going to try and learn Combine, and I actually tried to do that right out of the box 2 years ago, or well, yeah, 2 years ago when it was
Yeah, two
released,
years
right?
ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
So
crazy.
yeah, and so I bought I guess it was Martin Todoroff's book from Ray Wenderlich,
Yep.
and like I just couldn't see the point of it. I just could not see the point of it,
Yeah.
and so went through it, but there was nothing practical there. It was all just way too theoretical for me, and then Muhammad Azam, he basically took that book and did it as a video series. He does a lot of that where he'll take
Okay.
other people's content and put them out as videos, and he's upfront about that, and that was a little bit better for me. And then I signed up for oh, what's his name? Well-known Swift content provider who has a Swift Combined course. Oh, I can't remember now. Anyway, it wasn't
What's it?
cheap.
It was a book or a
Sorry,
course?
course.
Okay,
It was a oh gosh, I can't even remember the name of it now. But
that's okay.
anyway, it quickly got over my head. Are you searching for it?
I am searching for it. Yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Yeah. Anyway, so I got through that and it was over my head before I knew it. And then, this is my third attempt at it, right? And so then I decided, okay, I'll find another one. And then I discovered Karen Prater, who has a course on Swift on Combine, and
Okay,
that really was good. It was practical, and bang, I got
okay.
into it. And then I got uh, Dim Sum Thinking's book on
Yeah. Yep.
Combine Quick Start,
Daniels. Yeah.
Daniels, a completely different take. It's great, so I'm getting all these different vantage points on it. And then Mark Boykins comes out with his book that is really quite brilliant if you like those kinds of presentations. So, and finally, it was after all of that I decided, okay, maybe now I can do a video on it. So
Okay.
I did a video series on taking a normal Swift UI app, a to-do app. It's called what is it called? It's called Not Another Swift UI to-do app that I built completely out in Swift UI, and then I completely convert it to Combine. So it's and in fact, what I'll be doing in September. I've actually recorded the videos, haven't recorded the audio yet. Is taking that same Swift UI app and converting it to use not async because it's not async, but using iOS features, iOS 15 features. So
Gotcha.
basically, you're taking the same concept but doing it in different ways. And I think that's the
Yeah.
best way to sort of experiment with things on how to learn things is to let's take a different approach. Let's dive deep into a technology, but boy, it's a huge commitment, especially with Combine. And and now with the async await, a lot of that stuff that I was thinking of in Combine, I'm not necessarily using it now in that aspect, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't know. There's just so many different
Well,
ways
that's
that
interesting. You took
have
it
to
from
learn.
like so many different perspectives, and like we had Marin was the last guest I had on, and like I understood that stuff, and it was easy for me to understand once I figured out the reactive way of doing things. But like, yeah, like it's interesting that Karen was the one that really like cooked you and got you interested in it, and you understood the concepts. And I think like that's one of those similarities I think with like develop experienced developers and like people who are new at this stuff is we all come at it with like certain assumptions about how it works, and then
Right.
that's what I find is like I when I was doing Stripe API or the store kit, and it's like, well, this is what you're just giving money, and then like here you call the API to charge the credit card, and then it's like no, you have to like check the receipt and do all this stuff, and like it was like, oh, now I understand like the mental model of getting actual money
Yeah.
and like having people buy your product. Now it's like, okay, I get it. Like you have a customer, you have a product, you have a price, you have, and like that, I think like that's one of the things about grokking these big APIs. And it seems like you really specialize in like making sure people understand like the foundation first, right? Because that's one of the problems I end up getting myself stuck is when I try to integrate different things together. Like, oh, how do I do server side Swift, but also with like Stripe? And it's like, no, slow down. Like, get a foundation first.
Hmm. Well, when I first started out doing iOS development, I took one of these courses that were, like learn 12 apps and become an iOS developer kind of thing.
Oh, shit.
And well, and it was great as an overview. But boy, it really didn't do me any favors in the long run. And my modus operandi, because I've got 12 apps on the App Store. None of them, I mean, a few of them are making some money, but most of them are just, I scratched an itch. I built an app because I wanted to do something, and each one has a different focus, and that was kind of good. But the code's not very good in any of them, maybe except for the last one. But the, the way that I did things, like, okay, so I needed to do, oh, in my wine app, I needed to scan barcodes and
Right.
be able to find the wine based on the barcode or something like that. And so I would find a piece of code that I would just copy and paste into my app, and then tweak it until it actually worked. And God, I had no idea what was going on. And this may have been back in the Swift 2 days. And
Yeah,
so,
right.
you come back to Swift 3, and you just better hope that those upgrades, those migration things actually work, because
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was doing, right?
Whoops, I didn't have
And,
any try catches. Now you got to add those.
yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah. So, that whole copy and paste stuff, I don't, it just goes against my grain. I don't, so I don't like watching people's content when they're providing too much of a boilerplate and without me understanding what's going on in behind. And I find that sometimes, and that's me. That may not be for you, but for example, the Ray Wenderlich stuff. I'm a subscriber, I get their stuff. But when I was first learning, I didn't find it particularly helpful because their starter projects were far too sophisticated for me at that point. So even though
Interesting. Okay.
they were teaching individual concepts, but the whole backbone of that starter app was way beyond the way that I had ever been developing things. So, I had to take a bit of a step back. Now I have no issue because whenever I get a starter app, I dig down to find out exactly what someone has done. And if I provide a starter app in my tutorials, the first 2 or 3 minutes is going through showing people exactly what I've done. And by the way, if you don't know how to do this, here's a video that shows you how to do that, right? I have a single video that shows you this particular concept.
Yeah.
So, I think it's really dangerous to try and to just take content, copy and paste from Stack Overflow or from wherever and throw it into your project, because if things change, if the framework changes, the API changes,
Which
you're
they
left
do.
out there. Sorry?
Which they do quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, that's a real danger, I think.
One thing that I do when I want to figure out how something works is I might like copy and paste it. But what I really want to do is like I want to understand it. So I might change a variable here or
Yeah, yeah.
look up the definition here or like try like almost like not I don't want to say break it, but like figure out what the heck do all these things do? Like
Yeah.
especially some of the older like ones where you have like a bunch of flags. What is it like dispatch queue, like GCD stuff? There's like a ton of flags there, and it's like I want to know what each of these things do. Why do you use them? Should I ever use them? Like that to me is like what's important because it's like you said, copy and pasting, like that works, but like you're gonna have to customize it. Like you're gonna have to change things, obviously. And so like
Right.
and I that's what really I'm about is like when I do copy and paste, like it's like I want to know like what do these lines do? What are they? What happens if I change the string? What happens if I call
Right.
this function, etc. And why is it in that order?
Yeah, and I really love to option click and dig down into the documentation and find out what are the default values for these particular parameters or arguments, and what are some other methods that might be for this that I could use that might
Right.
be a little bit clearer, and I think that's a skill that you have to develop. I think you really do have to dig into that documentation and find out what are the defaults, how are things supposed to work, and what are the expected outcomes that you should get. So,
What do you think are some other traps that you can fall into when you follow tutorials or videos that might keep you kind of stuck, I guess?
well, I think one of the biggest problems people have is when they're starting out, in particular, is that they have this idea for this app, and it's a fairly significant one. I mean, I'll get these messages from people and who want some help, and they've got this idea for this app that is multifaceted,
Right.
and they have no idea how to do it, but they just start out. They just start by coding without really having a game plan on how to reach that end. And there's others that will just watch tutorials and they'll never get off the tutorial track. And then there's others that just jump in and all of a sudden then they start to add more features, and it's just like they're plugging in, to try and get something from somewhere else there's no relationship between it, or
Mhm.
they've learned a concept that was shown by one person that is completely different architecture than what they've used, yet they're trying to make it fit with theirs. And so I think it's really important to start small and build. If you have an idea for an app that's going to include photos or whatever, an image of something that you're going to do, then focus first on building an app that can allow you to use a picker and the camera and to display that content, to save it to locally, to reduce the quality, and perhaps zoom in on that photo or something like that, and then nail that concept down
Yeah.
and store that away. So when I'm building a new app, I've got a folder that and they're all something dev. And within there, I've got maybe 10 or 11 mini, projects that are focusing only on one particular topic that I want to cover.
Yep.
And oftentimes when I'm doing that, I'm learning, wow, I could end up doing more, because there's nothing worse than starting down a path and then finding out that you can do more, but realize that you haven't coded it properly. The architecture isn't such that you're going to be able to integrate that additional feature without doing an awful lot of work. So I think the more upfront work you do, the better your end result is going to be. So it's not a race. It's slow down a little bit. But I know some people are in this, people aren't like me. I've got no agenda, right? I've had 2 retirements, and so there's no rush for me. And others, I know that they want to, get their product out, or they want to get a job in the community, in the iOS development community. And so, maybe I'm not given the best advice there, but if you really want to learn something, I think it's best advice is to slow down a bit.
I think like the big problem with going fast is it only will work in like one really tight use case, and like there's no flexibility. Like software is supposed to be soft, you're supposed to be able to change it, and then you end up being stuck. Like when you're talking about your photo app, like, okay, it only works in that one case. What if you need to change this little thing or add this feature? Like now you're kind of screwed. And I think that's a big part of the problem. Like when I was this goes back to like modularization. One day I will pronounce that word right. But like when I was doing the Stripe stuff, like it was important for me to like separate the Stripe API calls from the Vapor stuff and not trying to integrate 2 really complicated APIs that I know little about, and being able to do that safely. And like it was important for me to like fully understand how the Stripe API works before I integrate that with Vapor when I was doing purchasing and stuff like that. Or like with like land, like I don't know, just integrating multiple technologies. It's important to understand them in their own separate ways, but then like making sure that you can interchange parts easily, so that way the integration and the testing is working. So I
Right.
think like, yeah, like you said, understand one component of that deeply, and then dive into the other component deeply, and then figure out the integration after that, as opposed to just like
Right.
hacking the 2 pieces together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've had the pleasure, I say, of helping a few people out, mentoring them, people that are not as experienced as I might be. And and invariably they have an app that they're working on that is, it's a particular niche, and they want to get that app out. And so they'll come to me with a particular problem, and they'll try and define it, though they're not always very good at defining what the problem is. And they'll share their code with me, and I'll fix the problem for them, or show them how to fix the problem, work through them. And then after the fact, they say, oh, and by the way, I want to be able to do this as well. And oh, well, if I'd known that at the start, it would have
Yeah.
taken a different approach, right?
At
And
least they're a mentee and not a client, though. When it's a client,
yeah,
then
oh
it's even
yeah,
worse.
yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, that's tough. I think if you're ever working with anybody, it's really really clear. It's important for you to understand what your end goal is, so that you can have everything in
Right.
place. And if
And
you're the mentor,
I
just
think
be able to
sometimes
ask the right questions.
you don't know what you don't know. I think that's part of the
No, that's
problem,
true.
is like with these younger developers, or with a client, what I find is like they kind of know what they want, but they sometimes there's gray areas they didn't realize, that they need to be a little bit more specific about what they actually want. Because like
Yeah.
once they start using it, or start working with the app or coding the app, it's like, oh wait, I don't want it to do exactly that. I actually want this to be different, or this color to be different. How do I change that? How do I add pull? I thought pull to refresh is automatic. It just comes for free. And
Right.
then they like start using it, and then they realize, oh, they didn't mention that they need other things. And I mean, I think that just comes naturally in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I guess the challenge then, if you, as the contractor or the mentor, is to be able to ask the right questions,
Right.
because
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
you tend to know what's
Right.
possible. So by asking them, well, do you want to be able to do that? And they go, well, yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
didn't mention that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. I mean, that's a little bit, I think it's a little bit part of the mentor experience obviously would be to teach that's a gray area they need to specify. But yeah,
yeah,
with a client, definitely it's more necessary. So
yeah,
like
yeah.
how did you become a mentor exactly? How was that experience?
I think just through my videos. And I actually participate in a number of Facebook groups as well that are Swift development Facebook groups and Twitter. And so I'll answer questions. And the interesting thing is that most of the people that I end up mentoring are older people. And I'm talking older, like maybe not quite as old as I am, but getting close. And I think so, that's important when you're looking for a mentor, is you have to be able to identify with that particular person.
Okay.
And I never show my face on my videos, but I do have this avatar kind of thing in every one of the titles, so people get a pretty good idea that I'm not a young person. So I think that, and just maybe the way that I present, or maybe the way that I answer questions, people can sort of resonate with me that are older, and knowing that I'm not a threatening person, and so they'll reach out to me. And yeah, so and I'll help whenever I can. I'll dive into their code. I mean, normally I ask them to send me their code, because if they just send me a snippet of something, it doesn't mean anything. I want to see how it all
You need
fits
the
in the
full
big picture
context.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so then I'll just dig into their project, and sometimes we end up completely rewriting it completely, because they're not always large projects. They're fairly small, because that's the kind of people that are attracted to me, people that are more or less starting out. And yeah, so I start to build these relationships with people, which is, to me, is that's why I'm in it. Yeah, I think anybody who's a teacher who enjoys teaching, they're in it for personal gratification. We've got pretty big egos. You like to be complimented on things. The biggest thrill I get is when I have former students of mine, and I only taught for 11 years, but the first 4 years was in a small high school that shut down after those 4 years. And some of those students, I mean, they're only 10 years younger than me. They are some of my Facebook friends now that are, I'm up, they're up on me, I'm up on them. And just they give you this feedback about the impression that I made on them as a teacher.
That's
And
awesome.
so, yeah, well, it is. It's a great feeling, but that's kind of why we're in it. And I guess that's why I do this, is I like to get that positive feedback. I mean, you get negative feedback, which you do occasionally. I mean, it's devastating, but you got to work through that, right?
Right. Right. Right.
Um, so, and that's why I guess when I do my videos, like, I'm super concerned about making sure. And here's an example. I did this video series on the To Do app that is now being updated to iOS 15. And I completely misinterpreted. I'm not even going to tell you what it was, but I misinterpreted something. And I did 3 videos, recorded them, uploaded them to YouTube as unpublished, because I won't release them till later on.
Okay.
And I was going to sleep, and I realized that I messed up completely on that first video. So I now have to pull all 3 of them and re-record the video, re-record the audio, put them all together again, because I know that there's one guy in particular that is going to call me out on everything that I do wrong.
How how
Or why did you do that? You could have done it this way. And
how are the YouTube
yeah,
commenters? Are they much better
they're
than the
generally
usual crowd?
yeah, they're generally pretty good. They're
Okay.
generally
Okay.
pretty good. Um, but maybe that's just because of the audience that I have that don't know enough to criticize it. Because those that do, if I mess up something, like saying, well, that you're not really using MVVM. I get that a fair bit from some people, because it isn't. It's a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
I don't
There's
care.
there's a bit,
You
I don't
know,
know if you know this, but programmers can be very much in the actually crowd. So, you know,
yeah, I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's quite a few of
Anyway,
those out there. Trust me.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I've certainly learned. I think my first post on Stack Overflow back in 2014.
Okay.
And I try and do all my research and frame a
Yeah.
question, and it's
Yeah.
actually I've been getting really good, quick responses on just about everything now, and it's been great. So I haven't really experienced recently any of that negativity, but the first one came back, and he had re-edited my entire post by correcting my spelling of Xcode, with a capital X, capital
Oh,
C
right,
with a
right, right,
with a
right.
lower, because that's absolutely wrong. And other things where, I contracted instead of expanded two words instead of one, and oh boy, that was a bit humiliating because it comes back and it was completely corrected. And then he answered my question, but anyway. So yeah, that Stack Overflow can be a scary place if you don't know what you're asking.
My biggest problem with Stack Overflow, and I don't think it's Stack Overflow's problem really or fault, but it's kind of a mess because it still has a lot of old stuff on there, and like you'll end up with an answer to a question. Like I actually don't ask a lot of questions on there on Swift, but I do, like when I do a Google search, I'll find that there's a ton of um like you get an occasional Objective C answer, but you also get the occasional Swift 1 or Swift 2 or Swift 3 answer. And it's like, well, this is garbage for me. Like, this is kind of useless. And you have to like really weed through the answers to find the one that actually fits for like Swift 5. And it's like, yeah, I find that to be the biggest issue. And I've actually found that like when I Google questions, it's well, you end up with Paul, right? You'll always have Paul's
Right,
answers
right,
up there. But then like I've actually found a lot more like Swift forum answer, or not Swift forum. Well, Swift forum, but also Apple developer forums too. That seems
right,
to have
right.
crawled up and up in the Google search rankings in the last year or so. So I find that like a little bit more helpful in a lot of ways. I don't know, like Stack Overflow, it's not like it used to be 10 years ago when like I said, when I was a .NET developer and I was looking for an answer. Like I find it a lot easier to look for answers when it's not Swift related, when it's like JavaScript or something else that I'm working on.
Yeah, yeah.
But Swift, it like doesn't seem like a good fit right now when I'm trying to look for an answer on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, and yeah, you got to look at the dates for sure.
Yeah, right.
When the responses are. Yeah, and they're not always the correct answers either, and that's it's a challenge definitely to go through them, but yeah, sometimes I found that many times though it's been very helpful for me, so that's good. But then now when you're trying to dig into iOS 15 stuff, you don't know if you're doing it wrong or if it's a bug.
Yeah.
And so I'll often tweet saying, I can't get this to work.
Well,
What am I doing wrong? Or is this a bug before I file a feedback on it,
Well, let's talk a
And
little bit more about iOS 15 in the next episode. I think this is a good stopping point. And
Sure.
the next episode, we'll talk a little bit more about learning iOS 15 and mentoring, and finding good content and learning from others and things like that. Does that sound like a good plan for you?
Sounds good.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stuart, for coming on the show. Where can people find you?
Probably, well, the best place is on Twitter at Stuart Lynch. Everything that I do is basically at Stuart Lynch. So on Twitter is at Stuart Lynch. YouTube channel, Stuart Lynch. I do have a website. My personal company name is Createch Solutions. So I'll give you that link, and you can sort of link to it if you like in the show notes. But
Awesome.
that has a link to all of my my apps and my YouTube videos and courses and stuff like that people can go to and go on and take a look at those. So yeah.
Awesome. So be sure to join us for the next episode. Stuart's going to be talking more about iOS 15 and mentoring and some other stuff about learning. Folks can find me on Twitter at Leo G. Dion. My company is Bright Digit. Take some time to subscribe and like this video, and also to post a review. If you have any feedback, let me know on Twitter. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again in the next episode.